I'm going to just start with a few of the definitions you may hear today. I think this is a detailed workshop panel, so you're probably all familiar with some of the stuff, so I'll be very quick. You'll hear things like the word DevOps, MLOps, Gen AI, technoethics, and responsible AI, right? So none of those are new to you all, right? If they're new, let me know. Okay. So maybe I won't read these definitions and belabor the point then. But I did find when I was doing some research on the concept of technoethics, right? So I Googled that, I Wikipedia'd it, and I got this really interesting one-liner. No, it was not from a GPT LLM that gave me this answer. Wouldn't trust it if it was. Technoethics is an interdisciplinary research area that draws on theories and methods from multiple knowledge domains, such as communications, social sciences, information studies, technology, applied ethics, and philosophy, to provide insights on ethical dimensions of technological systems and practices for advancing our society. So this broad nature of technoethics is kind of the domain that we're living in here, and then we are diving deep into the specific ethics considerations and regulatory considerations of AI-assisted coding and the implications therein. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of set that context for us all. And kind of go from there. So my first question for the panel, and this is kind of for everybody, just kind of break the ice a little bit. So just a few sentences each, really, because we got a lot more details coming to get us warmed up. So where do we start in this space? What are the big considerations around ensuring safety and responsibility? And any of you who want to kind of get started, just at a high level, don't feel like you need to boil the ocean here. Bad analogy for the group here. Sorry about that. And let's go ahead and start riffing on that.
Okay, I can start. Thank you for the wonderful intros. Okay, really, really high level. How do I feel about it? And I guess I could say something controversial. Like, I don't know if I could work for a company that wouldn't let me use it. I don't know if I could. Maybe I could, but I really feel like if we are not using these generative tools, we're doing ourselves a huge disservice. So I guess we have to figure out how to do it safely.
Yeah, okay. Yep, there you
Yeah,
go.
I think, so as Gibby says, the productivity improvements that you're going to get from these is going to be incredible. So you have to find that way to make it safe and use it responsibly. I kind of break it down into a few different categories of like, consider the inputs. Are the inputs ethical? i.e., do you have access to the training data? And are you trying to use it in a ethical way? And then there's the outputs, because you might try and use the AI generative system in an ethical way, but then the outputs that you derive from it, are they also ethical, and how do we test for that ethical output?
Yeah, so I think I kind of agree with both here, right? But I think if we do not use generative AI, enterprises will get left behind. That's the reality today. However, on the flip side of that is you really need to understand how to use generative AI. What I mean by that is there are obvious gains here: productivity, text summarization, do things extremely quickly and make your day easy. But why and how you are using those tools is important when it comes to ethics, right? Is that focus. So every enterprise, I think, should be able to focus the people in that enterprise around the fact that what are we using this technology for and what are our standards, right? So I think that is the crux here. That it's no longer, I think, the situation where we should we use this or should not we use this, should we do this ethically or not. I think that's mostly a done deal. And just to follow up on that, so why do I say it's a done deal? Because regulations are coming. So whether you like it or not, you're going to have to do this now. So better, it's good, I think, to coalesce around that as an enterprise and start to really prepare for this.
So for the kickoff question is, we spoke to value, we spoke to the impact on a developer's kind of mindset and feelings of productivity and value and how they contribute to the organization. And we heard from Johnny that it's kind of critical these days, right? So just wanted to prompt you all with some thoughts on how does the adoption of AI, like give me some more of the advantages that adoption of Gen AI may benefit folks in this room or in the oil industry across different scales. So, are we seeing benefits? So where are we today? Are we seeing tactical things? Are we seeing big strategic things so far? What's the kind of maturity level in your view?
Let me.
If that question's too hard, I can go to the next one too.
Let me start off. So I think let me first dispel this idea that generative AI just was discovered last year. It really isn't that. Generative AI has been around for a long time. All the buzz got created around it with ChatGPT, right? So that kind of tells you about whether it's tactical or strategic. It is strategic. It has been strategic. It's just being highlighted now. And I think generative AI tactically, yes, efficiency gains, huge value there. But in terms of what generative AI's real strength is it allows you to extract patterns that are not possible for people to do from really huge sets of data. Right? And that is your strategic angle here, and this is more also for the energy companies, because you guys are the pioneers of big data, basically, right? You guys had big data before big data was a thing. So that means that if you really want to extract value, generative AI is the tool that is available to you. And the advances that you see are just basically showing you what the value would look like. Right? So now I think it is extremely strategic. And I believe most of the enterprises are taking that angle, looking at it as well. So it's not just about the hype, but also, okay, how do we continue to leverage it, mature it, make it a foundational capability from a strategic point of view? A long-term view is, I think, there for almost everyone I talk to, including Shell.
So I can take it from a little bit of a personal perspective. I use a lot of generative AI through like code assistants. I write a lot of code with it. And what it's really helped me to do recently has been writing really good tests, writing in a really strong test-driven development way, where it can kind of see the test that I'm writing, flip back to the code that I'm writing, and it makes that loop of writing a bit of test, writing a bit of code a lot faster. It's made it more so that I can focus, instead of just focusing on the code that I'm writing, I'm focusing on the quality of the code. I'm focusing on the design patterns that I'm using. I'm focusing on making more robust software, because it's taking away the sort of boring background tasks and turning it into and kind of handling those, whereas I can focus on the wider picture of the software that I'm trying to write.
Yeah, so I would say that I've always thought of development as an enabler, right? And we have so many people here, I'm sure, that are not computer scientists, but develop in order to, get their functionality out. And I see the generative coding tools, the code assist, as a way to up-level the non-functional work in your repository that maybe was not your core expertise, but now is going to increase your readability and increase the maturity of your code without you killing yourself, and then you can focus on the functionality.
Beautiful. I like that. So leading into the next question is around developer maturity and the impacts of Gen AI on developer maturity. And you spoke to that a little bit, Johnny. You're like, hey, this thing is helping me, and it's actually helping me focus on what matters, and it's taking away all the kind of the overhead. Can you guys riff a little bit on how you foresee AI augmentation to impact maturity of devs over time? Are they going to get better from this? Are they going to get atrophied in some areas? What does that mean? And then what are the other ethical and other risky situations that could emerge there?
So, I mean, I think from a safety and ethics perspective, how are you safely and ethically using any of your computer tools, right? And how can we abstract from that how we think that this should occur? I think about coding and I'm like, well, in a way, we were talking to a language that was going to talk to a compiler language that was going to get something done, right? We were always And now we have, in my view, added another layer there, right? Where now we can talk to a code assist that's going to talk to another language. So I think from the intentionality of, are we delivering what we thought we were going to deliver? Well, we were already bad at that, right? We already miscommunicated in our requirements before, right? So how do we safely ensure that we're not doing that now? I mean, I would say, how were you safely ensuring that you were doing it before? And there were those guidelines and those recommendations and those best practices, but you always had those level, kind of that level of mistake. But if we talk about developer maturity, sorry guys, if we talk about developer maturity, yes, you have developers that are very low maturity, in my view, because I'm going to take a positive spin to this, is now they are accelerating, right? Now they are moving. You'll have really mature developers that, now they can support younger developers by doing less, right? And they themselves are also still learning, right? I mean, development, in a way, attracts people that are interested in that continuous improvement, at least at the very senior level. So I think that, benefits across the board, but if you have people, junior developers, that weren't being guided before and now aren't being guided using a code assist, then I think you've got a problem and you're probably skirting the edges of safety and ethics.
I think it also kind of, it enables lots of citizen development. So it means that you don't have...
I'm here for the people.
Yeah, exactly. You get a load of different, people that might not necessarily know the good software engineering practices. You enable lots of people with no background in coding and no ability to get that supervision.
But
from
weren't
a
they
software
enabled
engineer.
before?
They were. But now the power of the things that they can do is amplified by giving them access to Python. And this isn't, or
Well, they
whatever.
already had access to Stack Overflow.
They did, and a lot of copy pasting from Stack Overflow has caused design issues or problems in the past.
But aren't those things that the generative AI has learned from? So they're going to be giving them even better advice?
Potentially, yeah. It could be giving them way better advice, but then they might be using that in a unsafe way or an unethical way, or they might not understand the results that are coming out from it. I'm not saying this is something that we should prevent, but it's something that we as software engineers and developers should be aware of, because it means that you need to then coach your citizen developers in good practices and make sure that they're kind of informed about the potential mishaps of using it.
But were you coaching them before?
I certainly have coached quite a lot of citizen developers in my time, and in terms of making them write tests, making them write more robust software, and that has been great for their development. And it's ended up with a citizen developer turning into a full-time developer, and now they're way more sort of not dangerous, but capable in the way of developing software now. So, yeah.
Are you threatened by them now?
I was a citizen developer. I started coding about 3 years ago in terms of full-time software engineering. Before that, I was primarily just writing into models that existed already and typing in numbers to a reservoir engineering model, and then creating forecasts from that. And I think there's a bit of my engineering background is saying, hey, you've got to understand those models, and you've got to understand them, and you can't treat them like a black box. And I worry that some of the sort of same sort of things can transfer across into software engineering, where we don't want to treat them like a black box, and we don't want to treat the outputs of generative AI in code as a black box as well.
So I'll add real quick to that, Jeremy, 2 points, right? First is to what Gibby was saying, basically is, will it get developers to become better developers? And the way I think about it is, talking from experience here, right? I work a lot in the geophysics domain, the geophysicists, and there now you have digital tools. A lot of the, just like citizen data scientists, right? People have basically upskilled themselves We have built tools that are AI aided today. And what do those, how does that community use those tools? It is basically so that all the repetitive manual tasks are taken away from them, and then they spend most of their time where their expertise are really needed. So that's how I think, to Gibby's point, that's where it helps expert developers, right? Now you can do many more things with your time. So it's a scale up basically. And with junior developers, I feel there are two aspects here. Yes, it can definitely help. And the way it helps is, I think, I've been a software developer and I've been a data scientist. And one thing I can tell you from the data science set of people is they develop a lot of code. They're not software developers. So how do you teach this huge group of people how to code better? You cannot possibly expect them to get a computer science degree. And that is through showing them examples of how to do it. And that's where I think copilots can help, is they're generating these examples over and over again, and it helps you upskill very, very quickly, right? And use those tools properly. On the other side, especially with the citizen data scientist pieces, now you have people doing things with a tool they are not really qualified to do or understand the implications of. And I think that is the risk here. And I think that the way to mitigate that risk is create awareness around what is this tool good for versus what is this tool not intended to do. And if we can get that message across, then I think it's a real powerful tool for upskilling overall.
That's a really great segue. It's almost like you've seen some of the questions I might ask next. So we mentioned a couple really great points about how Gen AI tools bring a non-developer into the arena. I'm not going to say competent, valuable yet, although we do know that there's a lot of opportunities there to bring some value quickly if you can mitigate the risks. And then Apurva, you also mentioned around the tools that are coming, and I think Gibby also mentioned that like all of them are getting AI modules attached to them now. Everyone has an AI helper. How can large enterprises, excuse me, sorry, the mic here. How can enterprises navigate the increasing integration of AI tools, especially around compliance challenges, quality challenges, other risks that might emerge from doing something maybe outside your specialist, your domain of speciality? So how do big companies, or small for that matter, kind of manage this? And what can they do to ensure transparency and compliance?
Well, that's a great question, Jeremy. I think that when I think about this, because I'm not in a large enterprise anymore, but I have seen kind of how compliance and regulations will adjust your development workflow. And I think for me, and we've talked, there's the different profiles of developer and maybe the different oversight that each of them need in probably a different way. I would, and the global companies are facing new regulations around how you're going to leverage AI. I think that it is going to be a challenge for a lot of lawyers. And I hope that they take the time to really sit through the workflow with the developers. Because I don't think you can really take and we've just talked, the productivity loss is so enormous that I don't think you can take a broad stroke to a lot of these regulations that maybe you might have before. I think before you'd be like, oh, that's too risky. As a rule, none of us are gonna touch it, right? And I think that now they're really gonna have to say, where is this safety line for us? And are we going to lose our competitiveness if we are not willing to experiment? And I hope that it is, a not a 30-minute call and a real immersion from the compliance perspective of sitting and understanding maybe the tools and how they are supporting the workflow of different team members.
Other thoughts?
I think with compliance, and let me talk about the energy industry specifically, right? So compliance is not new overall. Compliance measures, in fact, I think energy industry is ahead of the curve in many ways, that there are compliance requirements over many years. So they have the right processes and controls already in place. I think what the challenge is going to be, how do you then take all of the, within your enterprise, where AI is used, how do you make sure that those processes and controls are now influencing all of those pieces wherever AI is used? And not just that they're influencing, maybe you need to add to your or change your processes now to fit for the AI compliance. So I think energy industry, I believe, is in a good state in the sense that they have done this many times over. I think the only challenge is going to be creating awareness, firstly, around the risks of AI and the mitigations around it. Right? This is again goes back to my original point. People should know when you're using a particular tool what it is capable of doing, and that tells you if I'm using it in an ethical manner or compliant manner or not. So it's a lot about educating people, creating awareness throughout the enterprise, which is no small task, of course. But then the second thing is, if you have processes already in place, controls in place, how do you then modify them, upgrade them, adjust them to compliance? I think the final point I'll make about compliance is it's coming faster in the AI space than people had anticipated. Even for even big tech, for instance, has been looking at compliance for a long time, but it is coming faster and at a scale that it's quite broad. So when that happens, I think what we have to make sure is we quickly get there. So we quickly become AI compliant. And the challenge is what AI compliance looks like is not set in stone. So it's going to be discovery, implementation, all at the same time. So that's going to be something of a challenge. Let's see how we do.
Yeah, so that, dovetailing into my next question is really how and specifically around the EU legislation, because I believe that's kind of at the forefront at the moment, timeline-wise, et cetera. How does the EU legislation define AI? Just to start, because you said, yeah, hey, we're using AI tools. Okay, what are those? What are the range of those? And then can you speak to your understanding of the implications of the legislation and anything that you can share in that space? And that's for the entire panel. I know one of us has has been steeped in it, but.
Okay, let me start then. Thank you. So just before I get into the act, right, what is the EU Act? It is basically regulations and compliance around AI and how enterprises use and deploy AI. It is supposed to be finalized April of this year, and the way they have set it up, it's going to be staged. So enterprises will have some time to not just prepare, but also comply to those regulations. And the timeline is expected to get done and dusted and very well settled by April. 6 months from April, whatever they deem as high prohibited or unacceptable risk AI needs to stop. So all of the enterprise need to stop that. A year from now is any general purpose AI that you are using within your enterprise, you have to implement transparency compliance around those. And another year from them is compliance on high-risk systems. So that's the timeline. And the Act basically defines it in a risk-based fashion. So the way they have this regulation laid out is, depending upon the risk of your AI system or AI use case, that will define what your compliance requirements are, which is quite a reasonable way of doing that, by the way. And just because we're talking about Gen AI, how does that sit into the risk-based framework that they have? Again, it's not about the technology, but it's about how you are using the technology. So it's outcome, the risk is defined by the outcome of the AI system and how that outcome is used within your enterprise. And then,
Can I ask a question about that? So does that mean that it's how I use the generative AI, and I'm going to use a really bad example. So let's say I'm using Grammarly to come up with a variable name, right? I'm using generative AI in there, and but then my whole program or my whole repository is going to something that is for health and safety. Sorry, guys. So is that what they mean by how you're using it? Or what they mean is do they care that this software is going for health and safety and that's what's making it high risk? So anything within it is bad? Or do they care which generative AI tool I'm using within the repository for which purpose?
No, I think that's an open question, to be honest. I don't think even the EU has defined this. So after the law will come out, all done and dusted in April, there'll be, I think, a 3-month period where they'll go ahead and have these discussions as to what does compliance really look like. Like what do the companies need to do? Because there is a bit of standardization that hasn't happened. Is what exactly do they mean? But from the text, the way it is, to answer your question, it's about this tool is used for a safety and security purpose. So all the technologies that go into those tools would be liable.
So in my mind, it would be this tool is being used for health and safety. So should we try to benefit from the productivity and the ability to review our code that a generative tool would give us, right? I feel like those would go hand in hand as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing I think the EU has done quite well is make sure that the compliance requirements are not that onerous that it stops or discourages enterprises from using AI. They have done, I think, a really good job of that. So they are not saying don't use AI for risk and safety. They're basically trying to prescribe how to use AI within the context that this is going to be used for risk and safety. So that's how the risk assessment is also laid out. So if you look at the examples, for instance, of high-risk systems, or even prohibited risk, they're not prescriptive. They're extremely descriptive, which is this is how it is. This is something that would, if completely driven by AI, would be high risk. That's how they have laid it out. So I think it's a balance definitely for enterprises to really understand what compliance means. And again, there is not a whole lot out there to even understand. So it's something that the whole community, or at this stage, everyone who uses AI has to figure out as a community and not something that is just decided in silos.
So how do you, at least from a large enterprise, do you view this similar to the decision for your enterprise to allow like open source technology to be leveraged for a health and safety product?
So that is one aspect of it for sure, right? But in terms of compliance, we would, the way we are looking at it is very similar to GDPR, for instance. How did we, because those are again, those are not AI regulations, but data privacy and data protection regulations. So how did we approach GDPR? We approached it from a very much the same way actually the EU AI Act has been laid out. It is based on the use case, based on how and why we are using it, what is the value proposition, looking at it from the risk that it brings, and are we ready to manage those risks or not?
But
so it's
data privacy didn't affect your core business in the way that this will, in my mind. Just, and as an energy firm, I feel like data privacy did not.
So I think the question is really how much of the AI is then related to core business, right? And that is what will define what is going to be, or how quote unquote onerous the compliance would be. So I don't think it's about this changing, business priorities in any way. It's really about how do you make sure that the way we are using it is compliant. So I don't think it's all the way. It's not like a regulation on safety on a drilling rig, for instance. I don't think it's at that level.
Good stuff. Any other comments you guys want to make before I pivot us?
No.
Okay. You're doing a great job. So we touched on this a little bit around, and you mentioned how the legislation is kind of thinking about AI and it's outcome-based, and they're thinking, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, and I know this is still under litigation, so to speak, but they're thinking about it as if the entire workflow is AI, and that's kind of how they're governing. So can you speak to, so in that case, we probably don't have full end-to-end AI-owned workflows yet, right? There's a couple options in the as we get to that full adoption concept. And in the meantime, we still have to do work, right? We still have existing business processes. As you mentioned, we're already regulated in a ton of ways. So as we adopt AI, how do you foresee the legislation impacting kind of speed to market other things that, folks might be concerned about legislation coming, and so that they don't act, or they're pending Apurva's amazing recommendations before they can take the next step, right? So, and that's for all of you all. How do you feel as regulation is coming? Speed to market is impacted. You want to do POCs, I'm sure. Your organizations do. How do we adhere to the legislation best practices while still implementing POCs that may push the boundaries and then getting long-term value?
So I think that it's inverted in the sense that like the generative AI tools, in my mind, will help your repository get to a healthy status, will help your work get there so much faster that whatever, I hope, the burden of additional compliance because you're using this tool will be offset by, how much faster your quality got there.
Do you think in the short term we're going to be bound by a not starting condition due to concern or fear, or is it just...
I'm starting.
Okay. We got some cowboys and cowgirls, ladies and gentlemen.
I think
In a good way.
a key point here to realize is the act only applies to AI in production. Does not apply to POC.
Production
That's why
only.
I said
Very good.
I think the act has the EU Commission has done a really good job of making sure that this does not in any way stop or discourage enterprises from adopting AI.
But I think getting your idea from, ideation, just making that functionality more of a solution in a package is becoming so much faster and more accessible, right? Because of kind of everything in this space in the past, 5 or so years, especially the past 2. With things that 5 years ago you're like, wow, that would be cool. And now you're like, wait a second, that we can scale so much faster.
So what you're talking about is time to market for a POC.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is, if you even look at the compliance requirements, when I say they are not onerous, basically all they expect you to do is to be transparent.
Yeah.
Right? Is to say, this is what my model was trained
Yeah.
on. Please only use my model for these things.
Yeah.
And that's all it is supposed to be or trained to do. And as long as the usage of that AI sticks to those guidelines, they're not expecting you to do anything more than that. They're expecting very reasonable risk assessments to happen before you put something in production, which is anyhow something you would do.
Do you kind of imagine it like how a large enterprises uses like a Snyk or something like that, like uses a security analysis tool where they're like, hey, here's a list of all the packages that you used. Okay, now we've signed off that turns out you can use them and we wrote them all down and everything is fine now. Do you think it's going to be a similar workflow?
So I think Snyk can help making something ready for compliance. But I think that's all that it can do right now. And that is because we do not know what this will look like when it actually comes into force, right? Reading the text, you will see, okay, they're talking about things like transparency. They say document your data. But what does that mean in practice? What pieces of the data do I have to document? That work hasn't been done. And in any case, I think the reason I call it not onerous is because really all they're talking about is best practice. You really should do this anyhow.
Yeah, any of the responsible AI
Exactly.
guidelines.
So can you speak to, while we're on the subject, penalties for noncompliance, your understanding of how that noncompliance, I'm sorry?
Should go to jail.
How is that noncompliance ascertained, right? Oh, you're in production now. We've been watching you since POC, but now you're in production, Speak a little there, and then I want to talk about the role of humans in oversight.
So I will talk really quickly on this because I'm a small company. We will run 1 or 2 projects at a time. Our development quality is like 1-to-1 with our reputation, right? So we are always supporting another client, and part of like the quiz or the test or whatever it is they will look through our code to ensure it is as mature as advertised. So I think when I think of my own workflow, it's only benefit, right? It's now we were already trying so hard to be there, and now I can get a junior developer there so much faster than I could before. So for me, it's just upside in terms of what we want to do. But I think in large enterprises, maybe there's different challenges.
So Let me first answer Jeremy's question, right? The
Regulatory penalties, et
Yeah.
cetera.
penalties.
and
So
how it's
it
tracked.
is non-compliance with the EU AI Act is 7% of the enterprise's annual revenue, which is more than twice of GDPR, by the way. So that's quite a significant penalty, to be honest.
So penalties are 7% of the organization's annual revenue
Exactly.
for being,
Non-compliant. And
let that sink in.
how they oversee it, again, not completely set in stone, but one thing they do ask is if you have any high-risk systems, they be registered with the EU Commission. Again, what that looks like, what that database looks like, all of those things, these things are in place, but since nobody has implemented this before, I think there is going to be a bit of, firstly, the standardization has to happen, what that really looks like in practice, and then that would decide. But no, they do not come in and monitor. But there are external audits, for instance, that can help with that.
For me, this seems like it's the EU regulations are kind of targeting more the companies that are going around and creating the generative AI models rather than the sort of users of it. I'm a consumer of those models. I don't know how it would kind of work when you take an AI model and you've used it to generate a load of your code or your work, or it's integrated into your systems, but then that generative AI was found to be non-compliant. I don't know what happens then with the code that you've created from that. Like, I don't know if there's going to be any sort of, you have to now take down all of that code, you have to change it, you have to figure out what was created by it. I don't know how that works. I think we're in sort of new space with that one.
I think in my mind, it would operate similarly to just like if there's a security issue with a library that you're already using, right? So you refactor your code. You get an update saying this library that was in here we no longer think is safe, and you go, okay, let's make some changes.
But what if the non-compliance was something around the training data that was used, i.e. they didn't have legal access to it? I think that becomes more difficult.
I'm imagining it has to do with the utility of how you're using it as well. So if your input data and then your testing output data is looking like what you thought it would look like, given that's what you thought that the mechanism or whatever technology you're using would do, I would imagine that would be your liability. But I think it gets very.
Just to clarify it, so the EU Act defines three sort of players or personas in terms of AI and usages. Right? One is a deployer of AI. So it would be somebody like Microsoft giving you some pre-trained model so that they become the deployer. So they become the controller. But if I'm using a Microsoft AI model, then I become the deployer. The liability is on both, by the way. It's on the controller as well as the deployer. There's another term, and I think people who are familiar with GDPR know these terms, but they might mean slightly different things when it comes to AI, is processor. And that goes back to the point you were making is, if I'm using a AI model that is trained by a third party, and they have trained it on a data that they had no official license to train it with, then who is liable, right? But I go ahead and deploy it in my workflow, then my liable is a third party liable. The third party is the controller, so they are liable in this case, or the processor. However, these things I would say are a part of the interpretation of the law, which is what exactly would a controller mean, what exactly does a processor mean and a deployer mean in the context. And I believe that has not been completely flushed out anyhow.
I just think it would be difficult to tackle, because if I was going to view, like the example that you gave, because if I was going to view, we created a tool that's going to help you make a decision, right? And then, okay, there was something wrong with that tool, but at the same time, so many people are using ChatGPT to help them make a decision, right? Is everyone just across the board, 7 points? Like everyone that used
7%,
ChatGPT at the enterprise level that day?
For production apps in violation, allegedly, right?
Correct. What I would say is that there is no answer to that question just
Yeah.
yet, and not that I don't have the
But
answer.
I think
also there are
inheriting
nobody-
their mistakes will be tricky to
And
But
so to
that's-
that to that point, and this is sorry for the Apurva show here, although it is brilliant.
she's an expert.
How do you foresee the iteration of the legislation, right? So if version 1 comes out, when is version 2 in your mind coming, or ever, and how prescriptive do you think that will be versus prior?
I don't think there is any set timeline or talks around when the next version comes. We're waiting for the first version still. But I think what might happen is in this process of standardization where they go in and prescribe a lot about what compliance looks like, and as companies start to implement those requirements, I think maybe there might be a need to revise it at some point.
So let's talk about the role of, and at this point, 11:48, I'd like to, Sammy, extend the invite to the group here, but before Stan asks a question, sorry, Tommy, got your name wrong, Tommy. Talk to me about human oversight, right? So Johnny, you're doing human oversight today as the co-pilot is doing your dirty work, so to speak. Is that for everyone? Is that the model at the moment? Are there unique AI for energy safety considerations, risks, things that maybe you encounter that others like in fintech don't encounter?
I mean, there's always safety layers that you have to put in. We kind of talked about it. We had it talked about this morning with Immubit, where they implement lots of safety strategies on top of their models. They don't let it go or at least the talk said that they don't let it go unattended and don't let it go beyond certain bounds and put lots of restrictions on it that enable the safety. You can do the same with the sort of AI code bots. You put the certain bounds on the code that the AI creates by writing tests, making sure that it's doing the things that you'd hope it to do by running those tests and creating not just the positive tests, but also test the negative of those systems. I don't work with safety critical software. It's not something that I've written before. I'm working with very unstructured text data rather than sort of safety critical systems. That's another oversight that you can do with it by not deploying it on those. But these AI safety AI generative models or assistive coding things have also found bugs in software before.
Yeah.
So we can then use that to find those bugs and to generate more of the diversity.
That was my side question is, can you have a co-pilot that watches your co-pilot? And
Yeah.
what does that look like? And
I mean, models
like adversarial training, so to speak.
Yeah, models have been shown to be very effective when they've given time to reflect and given time to sit back. One of the examples given was if you ask ChatGPT, for example, the capital of Australia, and it will say Sydney. But then you go, are you sure? And then it goes, hey, no, oh wait, no, that's the wrong answer, and gives you the right answer. So yeah, I think that would also be a case. But you've got to be careful with those because you don't want the same bot monitoring the same bot that's been trained on the same data set, because then there could be biases, there could be incorrect answers in there that feed back onto itself.
So I love collaborative work and I love, peer programming. And I think that having a tool like this gives you that peer effect. Obviously, even when you're working with your peer, you're going to ask those questions like, are you sure? Does that make sense, right? You have to sense check things. But, one element of human in the loop upstream in this is, even the prompt engineering of it. If you have the maturity to ask it to do certain things, right? Like if you give it a style code, if you give it all of the guidelines, if you give it those bounds, right, of how you want it to look, right? We're looking for SRP, we want this, write code in this manner, then you're going to get a more fulfilling output. And I think that's like upstream in the human in the loop. But downstream, as the end user here, engineering has historically done an excellent job at keeping humans in the loop, right? Most of the AI-driven technology is to allow and enable engineering in a safe way with, with support there, which you don't see in marketing. No.
That's the difference right there. Okay, excellent stuff. Let's pivot over to our first question. No, not on, unfortunately.
All right. I have two questions that I'll ask in series if I can. The first one, let's think about like email. And for those of us old enough to remember when email was invented, we thought, oh, this will be so great. It'll really help communications, way better than sending a letter or a fax. Wow, I'm old. And so we thought email is going to be great. Fast forward to today, we have so much email we can't read it. And in fact, some companies just block all external emails. Jeremy, you know one. And so that is inhibiting communications, not improving. So with generative AI being able to help us generate all this stuff, how do we prevent it from creating so much that nobody's reading it? That's question one.
Thankfully, you didn't ask those in parallel. That would have been challenging to answer. Any thoughts there? Preventing junk answers from AI overload.
I mean, definitely oversaturation in AI, generative AI stuff is a real issue. You see loads of different amazing artworks, and then I've now that have been created, and I've now sort of started thinking, oh, that's just generative AI, and it's kind of boring now. In some ways, and that's only been like the best sort of models over the past years have developed a lot, but they've oversaturated me in terms of the content that they create, and I'm not as interested in the outputs that are created. So it's definitely one of the concerns. One of the other concerns is also that that data then leaks out into the ecosystem. So the generative AI stuff gets back into the internet, and then the internet is basically used to train new models. And researchers have shown that as you involve more of that generated content into those models, the models get more less creative. They get more boring. They get more unimaginative, and actually they kind of converge to just generated the same generated content, the same style. It loses diversity in the answers when you retrain on AI generated stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? It's not telling you a new answer. It's telling you what it thinks the most likely answer is, and that means that answer kind of already has to exist. So at least it's first pass. I think that there's ways with better prompts you can, ask it about applying different things to that problem, and it's like, oh, actually, yeah, that's possible. That could work, right? I think there's benefit in that. But if you ask it an open-ended question, it's going to quickly converge to groupthink, right? And feels very confident about that.
Next question.
Okay, thank you. And then I kind of envision a world where we get so busy that we're like, okay, well, have my AI filter all this stuff and just tell me what do I need to know, and then hey, AI, get back with Jeremy, and then his AI. So my AI is talking to his AI, and then they work something out that neither of us know about. So what are the legal and ethical environments when AI is kind of making side agreements that we're not really privy to?
We'll
How do
be
we
on the
avoid
golf
that?
course, so we'll just have them
So
summarize.
excited for that
Yeah.
day.
But yeah, what do you do in this utopian, dystopian thing where the AIs are talking to each other and making, decisions or something on your behalf, if that's a thing? How do we manage that?
I think I'll sort of quote my CTO, and I think she said, if I like you, I'll send you an email. If I don't like you, I'll get AI to write it.
Either way, you get an email.
Take that how you
though?
will. Yeah, take that how
okay,
you will. Yeah.
I mean, I think you see that a lot already in human life, right? There's a lot of times, I'm like, wait, to my husband, we didn't sign up for that. I don't remember us saying we were going to that event at all. What are you talking about? But I think that, it is the bounds of which you're going to draw that circle for it to interact with you. And I think, any of us that have worked with autonomous agents in the past, right? Like, how would you try to dictate the space in which you want it to work? And then I guess they made an answer that was within that space. So you're good, you're free.
If you're watching it, right, and if it's valuable, I think is the risk and the challenge. Other questions from the audience in our last 3 minutes? We answered all the questions about legislation, impact on the future. Please. Mic inbound.
My question goes in the direction of the future of using this coding assistant. Like right now, everyone that is using it somehow knows how to break down the problem, knows how to solve it in smaller pieces and just get scale on it. But for the future, how do you guys see it? People that didn't learn how to break down the problem, just try to give it as a bunch of prompts that sometimes can make sense, sometimes not, and how does it deal with putting that for the future in some sense? I don't know if
Yeah, it makes
sounds reasonable.
So I understand the question. I think for me, there's always going to be some selectiveness in who is using it, right? Like my mom doesn't use it because she doesn't want to, right? She doesn't want to go to a new website. She doesn't want to figure it out. I think that there is an element, unless we're forcing people to use it, of self-selecting into this tool has utility for me, right? How am I navigating it in a way that's exploiting the utility that I feel for it? And it's, I mean, I understand that you're, what if it gets in the wrong hands? But I'm kind of like, what are the wrong hands? Like my kids? Like, what are they gonna do with it? I think I'm not scared yet.
I kind of see it like how we were taught to use search engines. It's the natural response of trying to type in natural language into a search engine was always fraught with issues, especially in the early days of search engines. And
Still use the plus sign and
Oh,
quotes.
Oh yeah, quotes, ampersands. Just get to put it all in. But you're taught to kind of engineer it in a certain way, and I think we'll get used to and develop skills in actually being able to break down problems, but in a way that the generative code can kind of understand. And it comes back to a point where that Gibby was giving, which is like you get better at it. You just get more used to those systems, and it just becomes natural as it goes along. Yeah, I think there's a process, and it's a learning process, and it becomes useful to us. So we'll learn it.
Yeah, like adding things at the end. Are you sure?
Yeah, exactly.
and there may be a role for leveraging, and we've been talking about a lot of LLMs, right? We've been saying AI, but I think we're kind of meaning LLMs for the context short term here. But I think there's methods, if I'm not incorrect. First thing I did when ChatGPT came out was I said, hey, can you give me some Python code so I can talk to you directly through your API, please, instead of through the web page? And it was like, sure. And the first thing it gave me was a little wrong, so I tweaked it, put my API key in there, and then boom. And then I was like, okay, how can I remember the context of this conversation? Because it was like one-off messages that didn't have stored. And it was like, oh, create a giant variable and then pass the result back in. And then you're good up until we hit our token limit, right? Which is going to keep going up. And Gibby's like, that's not how you do that, which is the whole point of this topic, actually. The point is that you can maybe use AI. One maybe can use LLMs to help you use LLMs, so to speak, right?
I was actually going to agree with you that like one of the things that worries me the most is when you start to feel like it's throttling you, right? And you're like, well, now how am I going to work, right? If ChatGPT is not here to save me, what am I going to do for the rest of my afternoon? I can't come back in 3 hours. So there is an element of, and we will get smarter in how we use it so that we use it less, right? And we'll continue to adapt.
I think that's exactly the point. It's just right now at a place where unless you use it, you don't understand how to use it. So it's just like any other tool, to be honest, is keeping the generative AI hype away, right? It's a tool. And the more you use it, you will figure out what it's good at and what it's not good at, and you will start to use it for what it's good at. And I think you will also see that in how the technology around this is developing, right? So once what typically happens is you have the hype cycles, right? So you're up here, everyone wants to use it, everyone's trying to do that, and then there is a down trajectory there, and then it kind of settles down. So I think that settling point hasn't happened yet, and when that will happen, basically I think what will happen is we'll get a better handle on what it is good for and how to best use it for what it's good for. Plus we'll have a handle on what it's not good for, so let's not even go there. So I think that will happen just like with any other technology. I don't think we have been there. It's like the email thing, right? Email was brand new at one point. Half the people were understanding how to use it. Once you understood how to use it, it's no longer a big deal. And you will only then use it for stuff it's good for, otherwise you won't use it. I think that's what you will see with this.
Hope that answers. So last question, gentleman in the hat, thank you.
So my question is, if the EU is looking at, almost into the sense now of actually putting out legislation based on using AI, what is the U.S. doing? Because I know they're talking about it. Because what's going to happen if you create a program or something like that in the United States, but you need to use it or sell it in the UE, it might not pass the ethics and regulations. So is that going to force companies like the United States to write programs that they can actually use in the EU?
So let me, there are two answers actually to your question. One is with the EU AI Act, everyone expects it to be like GDPR, which is they were the pioneers of it, they started it, but it kind of turned out to be a globally applicable regulation. So I think that's to your answer of if I'm building a AI tool in US and deploying it in EU, well, where you deploy it is going to basically drive what legislation you have to adhere to. But you will see, and it is very much expected that other countries around the world will also start adopting the EU AI Act as a baseline and then maybe adapt it for the country and the region. And then I think the question you started off with was regulations in the US. So it's unlikely, at least from what is going on currently, that we'd have a US-wide regulation. It is currently, the way it is set up right now is statewide. So you have very strict, for instance, regulations around the bias that AI can bring in the state of New York. There are different regulations in California, very different in, I don't think there are any in Texas, for instance. So in the US, it is going to be a state-wise regulation rather than a US-wide one. That's the expectation now. You never know, it can change.
So with that, I just wanted to, first of all, we're a few minutes over, but I suspect AI will save you more than 5 minutes for the rest of your day, so you'll get that back. I wanted to thank our esteemed panel for all the great answers and insights today. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks.